All right. I will give you time at the end of class to ask questions about paper 4. If you have any issues to resolve, I will give you some time to do that. I would actually encourage you to, do one last read on some of those, damaging things like, your references page, making sure that meets the standards, making sure that your sources are in chronological order, making sure that your periods and commas are inside the citations and not outside, making sure that you're following the rules. And also making sure that you haven't forgotten about the rules of punctuation and making correct sentences and those kind of things, right? I think that there's a lot of last minute kind of touch up you can do. I just think that a lot of people tend to get overwhelmed with the research and forget about the details. And so, make sure you don't turn a paper in that makes those kind of monstrous mistakes. All right. Before we get to that, though, I want to talk to you about paper 5 because you need to get started on this right away. Right? I know you're busy. I know you have other classes that you take, right? But nothing is more important than this class. So your job is to get paper 5 going as soon as possible. Essentially, the same principles apply for paper number 5. I'm just going to add a few more things to it. Now, I don't have my syllabus in front of me. When is the paper due? It's kind of in the last week of the class. When is it? December the 2nd. All right, December the 2nd is when the final paper is due, and then we've got the last week of class. So you've got about 3 weeks to do this, 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks to do this maybe. All right, because today's November the 7th, right? So we've got next week, then you've got Thanksgiving week, and then we come back and the paper's due. Makes sense. All right, and then the semester ends. A lot of work. Hey, but you're here to work, right? You're not here to work. So, all right. So you've got a lot of work to do in the meantime. Here's what you need to be able to do. Obviously, you are going to have sections and subsections to your paper again. And what I would recommend is doing something like breaking up your paper into sections like this. Have an introduction. And the rules of creating headings and subheadings and those kind of things in AMA are pretty loose. In other words, what they say is just be consistent. APA, right, they said they have 5 different levels of headings, and if you use a certain type, you're supposed to have it, centered with italics and capital letters, all these crazy things, right? AMA says just be consistent. So just be consistent, just make sure that each heading, whatever heading has equal value, make sure it looks exactly the same. So if you're going to underline it or use bold or something like that, make sure the others are underlined and bold. But essentially what I'd like to see in the paper is 4 different sections. I'd like to see an introduction, a review of literature and discussion, a conclusion, and your references page. All right, so you're going to have 4 different sections of your paper. So we'll meet those. And to meet those requirements, you're going to need to do a couple of things. All right, in your introduction, same as paper number 4. Establish various treatment options and work toward the 2 best. Right? And then establish your operational definition and your thesis statement so that you can control the whole rest of the paper. In the review of literature and discussion section, the same principles apply. Synthesize, show relationships, focus on the argument, keep the reader focused on clinical significance, statistical significance, right? The things that are important. Clinical significance as established by your operational definition. Statistical significance as established by what we know about stats. So that you keep the conversation at each one of, and now a lot of times what I would like to see, is those subsections in here, right? Where you have those, your criteria for your operational definition, creating a subsection, remembering that at the end of each of your subsections, get that argument back to that piece of statement, right? Don't just leave your reader hanging with a discussion about data when those data aren't really focused in on what the ultimate argument is, okay? So each subsection under here in this review, obviously, just like we did with paper number 4, nothing unique, nothing different. The only thing that is going to be different is going to be the conclusion section. And what I'm going to ask you to do in the conclusion is, as you did with paper number 4, write a summary of your main arguments. In other words, take your subsections from your review and pretty much just combine them together in order to make some conclusions about whether treatment A is better than treatment B, or whether they're equally efficacious, or whether they're inefficacious. Whatever you decide, make that conclusion. But in the second phase of your conclusion, what I need to see is a discussion about future research. In other words, you are having an argument about these treatment options because the research probably does not demonstrate clear favorability on one side or the other, right? I mean, that's probably what you guys are learning as you're going through papers. In paper 4, is that the reason why we've got multiple treatment options is because the evidence is all over the place. I mean, the evidence shows that there's strength in one, there's strength in the other, or there's weaknesses in both. I mean, it's just, that's the nature of the beast right now. And that's okay. I mean, that's what I need you to recognize. But with paper number 5, what you're going to be working toward in that second half of that conclusion is establishing what do we need to do in the future in order to provide stronger research. In other words, what do we need to control for? What do we need to see happen? Where do we need to see research go that's going to give us better answers than where we currently are? All right? So kind of like we did with paper number 3, right? Where you kind of, and that's, again, more conceptual in nature. I'm not asking you to look at a study and tell me what's wrong with it. Obviously, I know you can do that because you can just read the limitation sections of those papers. What I'm asking you to do in this conclusion is to kind of conceptualize the topic. In other words, where are we in the state of research and where do we need to go from here? In other words, is the research kind of exhausted itself? Can we just not find any better answers? Do we need to start putting our weight behind other types of treatments? And if we are, where is the promise in those other types of treatments? I know, so you may end up saying, look, we should probably stop doing research in this area because we probably can't do anything more. Or you can say, you know what, this is the treatment that's showing the most promise. We need to put our efforts behind this, and we need to find out X, Y, and Z in order to determine whether this is actually a usable treatment or not. So to really conceptualize where the research needs to go, what we need to be able to do in order to make better decisions in the future. That's what I want to see in the second half of that conclusion. All right? So pretty much same as what you did with paper 4. You're just adding that little subsection on to your conclusion, right? And then we're going to spend the next couple of days working on sentence variation techniques. So what we're finding, in a lot of cases this happens, and this, this isn't a criticism of you, it's just the way things go. Let me just, let's go to this. What I'm going to ask you to do during the course of, over the next couple of weeks, is to learn the different types of sentence patterns that are out there, and to learn different ways to strategize to make your sentences more coherent. In other words, how to build continuity and flow into your papers. I'm sure many of you are starting to realize that when you're bogged down with a whole bunch of research, it's very easy to just kind of bullet point the information out. In other words, just throw out a sentence, throw out a sentence, throw out a sentence, and you lose that kind of continuity. You lose the control over the argument because you're just trying to get the information out there. So what we're going to work on is how to manage that information appropriately. And there's a bunch of different management techniques. And we're going to talk about all this stuff over the next couple of weeks. So prepare to kind of reinvest in the grammar end of things. But what I'm going to ask you to do for this is that we're going to establish that there are 5 types of phrases, and I want you to use each of those phrases 2 times. So you will identify those phrases by highlighting them, underlining them, or something, and you will label them. Okay? Now, a lot of people like to get fancy with their word processing program and use like highlights, so yellow equals infinitive phrase or whatever. Like, go ahead and do that if you want. You don't have to, right? You can just take a pen and underline it and write the label above it. But ultimately, there are 5 types of phrases. You're going to use those 5 phrases. You're going to use each one twice in your paper, and you're going to show me how you're using that, right? Which will get you a little quiz grade out of 10. And you will also recognize that there are 4 types of sentences, and we're going to use those 2 times, right? You're going to ID those, and you're going to label those, and that's going to give you a quiz grade out of 8. So there'll be 18 different types of manufactured sentences in your research paper that will show me that you are strategizing to manage the information in a certain way. And we'll talk about what the different types of phrases and what the different types of sentences mean in terms of the weight that they carry for your sentence structure. In other words, we'll be putting information in certain locations, we'll be moving information around in order to strengthen certain parts and weaken other parts so that there's a focus and a control. All right, so that we will handle. That's not a very difficult thing to do. Most of you use different types of sentence structures and strategies already. Maybe you just don't know that they exist. So I'm sure that what you could probably do is go through your papers once you've written it and identify most of these just by virtue of the fact that you're writing. And most of you are in good control of your writing. But in the case that you end up with a situation with a paragraph that's choppy and short and it seems like it's bulleting out a bunch of information, well, here's your opportunity to start managing that information better. So we'll give you those strategies and we'll talk about them over the next couple of days. So on Monday. So on Wednesday when we get here, I'll be breaking down the different types of phrases, and then we'll work on those things. We'll play around with some examples in class. I'll break down the different types of sentences. We'll play around with those in class. We'll have some little exercises where I'll give you sentences and tell you, here, pull these sentences together, manage them, make them, the different phrases, make them the different types of sentences. So you'll get plenty of practice in it. So it'll be no surprise. It's an easy way for you to get an extra little quiz grade to bump your grade up. Traditionally, just so you know, people who do poorly on these do poorly on the paper. There's an interesting relationship to that, right? People who do well on these do well on the paper, surprisingly. Like I said, I can predict success with a 25-question grammar exam. All right. So that's assignment number 5. You need to be out there. You need to start thinking of a topic. You need to start narrowing some things down. You need to start gathering your research. Obviously, you don't want to go out there and start gathering research until you've started thinking about your subject matter first. You got to think about that condition. You got to know where we need to be clinically with that condition. You got to start figuring out where do we want to be with treatment. What can we do to establish clinical significance? How would we know if we're treating these patients effectively? How would we know if we're successful? And once you figure that out by doing some background reading and thinking about that topic, then go out there and go on the hunt, right? And start looking at the different types of treatment options. Start with Cochrane, right? That's a great place to start because that does the hard work for you by kind of comparing things together. So that is a good place to help get you started. All right, any questions, any comments, any concerns about paper number 5? I know paper 4 is on your mind and you've got things to do with that. But do you have any questions about paper number 5 and what we're going to do? It's pretty much the same thing with paper number 4, we're just adding a couple twists to it. There's a reason why we're doing this, right? And that is to prepare you for what you're going to do when you get into the graduate phase of your work, right? So you're going to have to be able to do this, but at a much greater level of intensity because you're going to be more narrowly focused on specific topics when you get into your graduate phase. So you should like this. It's part of your lives. Okay, if you don't have any other questions about that, then I'm going to stop the